board to order. Michael Romano will be joining us by Zoom, and I'd like to confirm, Mr. Romano, that you are connected. Are you online?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. You're welcome.
Thank you. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, I'll lead the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, board members. It's nice to see everyone this morning. As we begin today's meeting, I want to remind everyone that wet season is now in full swing in Southwest Florida. We recently received some much-needed precipitation, albeit in large quantities. Thankfully, our dedicated team of water managers and field technicians work around the clock to maintain the Basin flood control system and keep it in operating efficiently. I look forward to hearing from Brad and Andrew's presentation later in our meeting, which will highlight the extreme rainfall event, which was Invest 90L. I'd like to also share with you a very, very exciting milestone that was reached in the Picayune Strand Restoration project. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to join the Corps and the district team and many of the officials and stakeholders who took the time to go out there to the Picayune Strand and celebrate that we've completed the FACA Union Canal plugging. And the Picayune Strand Restoration Project, as you know, was one of Governor DeSantis's priority SERP projects. And the Corps completed plugging the first 3 miles of the FACA Union Canal in 2021. And I had the honor of turning on the pump station. And we started getting some hydrologic benefit. Well, we celebrated the completion of the remaining 8 miles of the canal getting plugged. And it's one of the final components that's needed before we accomplish the project's goal of restoring the natural hydrology of over 55,000 acres of natural wetlands and uplands. This summer, we should be seeing some hydrologic restoration. And as Brad talks to us about the water conditions report, he'll add that as we go along. I'm really want to give a big shout out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because they're working on all fronts concurrently to bring this massive project to completion early next year. And this is something as a board we're really going to celebrate together. And I want to thank Colonel Jamie Booth for his leadership of this incredible team of professionals, and thanks Stephen Basin and Howie Gonzalez and Ava Velez for keeping the momentum going, because it's just been terrific how much we've accomplished in getting this project closer to the finish line. And next year we will get it over the finish line. And, you know, one of the unsung heroes out there is Felix Colon Cardona. He's with the Corps of Engineers heavy equipment team. The Corps has a heavy equipment team that's an internal resource that they can use to levy against certain projects in areas that they're very good at. And Felix Colon Cardona, he's the supervisor, and he oversaw the plugging of the FACA Union Canal. And not only did he finish the plugging, but then when they finished it a little earlier than normal, he went out and started removing asphalt from Miller Road. So I want to give him and his team a shout out, because they did an incredible job. He exceeded expectations and really did a super job out there with his team. And it's full speed ahead until we get to the finish line, and it should be early 2025 that should happen. So good news on all fronts there, and I'm looking forward to joining in that celebration next year. Housekeeping items for those joining remotely. Thank you for your continued interest and support. As a reminder, today's proceedings are accessible via Zoom, as well as Collier TV and the district's website. Board members, I'd like to ask you to please make sure your microphone is on and that you speak directly into the microphone so everyone online can hear you. If you've ever attended a meeting online or virtually and folks weren't close to their mics. You know how distracting that can be. So let's try to remember that. Mr. Romano, if you will use your raise your hand feature on Zoom when you want to speak, Troy will call on you. If you turn your head while you're speaking, and that happens often because we're talking to one another, especially during board comment, drag the mic with you so we can make sure your comments are captured. And please try to get as close to the microphone as possible. To be recognized, please use the buttons on the dais and they'll pop up on my screen here. For those here in person, if you would like to comment on an agenda item, please complete a speaker card from the lobby and bring it up front to Troy Miller. And if you're joining by Zoom, please use the raise the hand feature and Troy will call on you. If you're participating via phone, you use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute. So that completes our housekeeping items. And I'll now go to Lisa Keeler for our agenda revisions. Lisa, are there any agenda revisions?
No, Madam Chair, there are not.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on to the next item, which is the item abstentions by board members. I'll be polling each of you to see if you have any abstentions or disclosures on the agenda. Vice Chair Waters?
None for me, ma'am.
Mr. Hill?
I have none.
Ms. McLeod? Ms. Smith?
None.
Mr. Romano?
None for me.
And I do not have any. It brings us to considering approval of the minutes for the April 26th meeting. If there are no changes or corrections to the minutes, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the minutes from our meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters, motion to approve. Ms. Smith, second. I'll now conduct a vote. Vice Chair Waters?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. McLeod?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Romano?
Yes.
And I vote yes, that's unanimous. We'll now go to the Basin Administrator's Report with Lisa Keeler.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Well, I want to carry on the theme of good news, things that are going on in the basin. The first is, I want to make you all aware that 2 weeks ago, we had our first public meeting for the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative. It was well attended, both personally and on Zoom. And the focus of that was to introduce the public to what this project is about, that it being a 3-year planning study to help restore the hydrology in Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. And then also just to get the public's thoughts and ideas, as well as any concerns they might have for any of those restoration efforts. So it was well attended, and I want to thank Laura Lehman for putting together a really good meeting and managing this project very well. So that project continues, and we are scheduled to bring a presentation back to you at the October board meeting with some more ideas and projects. So we're moving this project along. It's going very, very well. The second item I want to talk about is towers. And I feel like I've talked about towers at every single meeting, but it's because I'm so excited about it. And my good news item now is that it is out for bid. And we expect the construction contract to be in front of the governing board in August. So super excited about this project moving forward. And I'd like to thank everybody that has been working on this. I mean, I think it's two or 3 years that we've been working on this project, from the IT team to engineering and construction. Our procurement team now has the ball on this. We've had a lot of support and input from Office of Counsel. So this is a project that has had a lot of staff attention on this. So it's great that it's moving forward, and bids are going to be opening soon. And the last item I have is about SCADA. And probably a lot of people don't know what SCADA is or why it's important to the district. So bear with me. I'm going to try to tell you a little story to emphasize the importance of SCADA to you. So imagine you're driving your car across Alligator Alley. Your mission is to go to the East Coast, right? And then we have a torrential downpour, and you can barely see the road. And then your dash lights go out. You don't know your speed. You don't know how much gas you have in your car, whether or not you have to stop, but your mission is to get to the East Coast. So you have to keep going. That dash light is our SCADA. It tells us information about our flood control system. And when it goes out, just like you driving, we're blind. It's not the best, it's not the best feeling to have during a rain event. And that's exactly what happened to us in June with this rain event. We had several of our key structures. We lost sight on water elevations. And so we have to employ the old-fashioned method of gathering data, which means we are sending Andrew's team out in the driving rain to go look at information and call it back in so that our water managers have most up-to-date information. So what happened is we called our SCADA team to talk about this problem. That was 3 weeks ago, I think now that we've had that. They first identified the problem. They knew what it was. They found a solution to it, and they are executing it right now. In fact, the team was out last week, and they are hopefully wrapping that up today. So to round this out, I want to give a huge thank you to our SCADA team and our water managers for working through this issue and making us more resilient as we move through the summer. So big thank you to them. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Lisa?
Yeah, just real quick, just curious, the SCADA outage, was it just really bad timing that it happened with that much rain, or did it, was it something triggered by the rain?
So what happens is they're on solar panels. And when we have gray skies for 4 days, 5 days, like we did with that rain event, we lose power. And so they have found a fix for us and getting us up. So that doesn't happen whenever we have a week of cloudy weather.
It's so unusual. Right.
Yeah, it is. So it's good work. And I really do appreciate their attention.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. Okay, that brings us to our first general public comment session. There are 2 opportunities during the meeting for the members of the public to address anything that's not on the agenda. We'll start with anyone who is here in person, followed by those joining us remotely.
Madam Chair, I have no one here in person registered for this item and no hands currently raised on Zoom.
Okay, we'll move on. All right, that brings us to our first presentation, the factors affecting the oyster health and survival in Southwest Florida. And we have with us via Zoom, joining us remotely is Melanie Parker. Go ahead, Melanie.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Again, my name is Melanie Parker, and I'm a science supervisor in the Coastal Ecosystem section with the South Florida Water Management District. And today I'm going to provide some information on basic oyster ecology, discuss the importance of oysters, and I'll finish by describing some oyster monitoring projects that the district oversees. So we'll go ahead and get started with some basic background information. The dominant oyster species in Florida is Crassostrea virginica, with the common name of the eastern oyster. This species is a bivalve mollusk, which means it has 2 valves or 2 shells. These oysters are found both intertidally, which means they're exposed during low tide, and subtidally, which means they're generally always submerged in water. And they're found in relatively shallow depths within bays, lagoons, and estuaries where fresh and salt water meet. And oyster reefs form when individual oysters fuse together to form small clumps and reefs. Next slide. Now we'll look at some life history of oysters, specifically reproduction and growth. And temperature is a highly important factor for both, as it can trigger certain reproductive events to begin or end, as well as influence the rate of growth and development during reproduction. So oysters in Florida begin growing eggs early in the year, and they spawn in the spring when water temperatures warm up. Oysters are broadcast spawners, which means they broadcast or release millions of eggs into the water column for fertilization. And the figure on the right shows the oyster reproductive cycle, with spawning on the bottom left, where you can see the adult oysters are releasing their eggs into the water. Once fertilized, the larvae or veligers stay in the water column as plankton for 2 to 3 weeks. And the length of this larval phase depends on temperature. So the higher the temperature, the faster the larvae develop, and generally that leads to a shorter larval phase. So this is important because while these larvae are planktonic, they're subject to the movement of the currents and water circulation patterns. So the time that they spend in that larval stage can affect their distribution in the estuary. So if the larval phase is longer, they may travel further downstream with those currents, and it can change where they end up settling in the estuary. Once oysters have grown and reached the petavillager stage, go back one slide, please. So once oysters have grown and reached the petavillager stage, which is shown on the top right of the diagram, they are ready to settle on the bottom. And those newly settled oysters are called spat. You can see several examples of spat settled on larger oyster shells in the pictures on the bottom of the slide. And the last thing I'll say for this slide is that adult oysters will continue spawning through the summer and fall, but they stop spawning late in the year when water temperatures cool down. And for Southwest Florida, this is usually November or December. So on the previous slide, I mentioned how temperature can indirectly influence oyster distribution by increasing or decreasing the length of that larval phase. But the key factors that really influence distribution are substrate availability and salinity. So first, let me briefly explain why substrate is important. Larval oysters need substrate to successfully settle and survive as spat, and the ideal substrate is another oyster or an oyster reef. They won't survive if they settle in soft sand or mud, and once an oyster settles, it cements itself to that substrate and can no longer move. So again, if it's not an appropriate environment, it most likely will not survive. So now I'll talk about why salinity is important. And oysters are estuarine organisms, so they are adapted to tolerate a wide range of salinities, anywhere from a salinity of 1 or 2, which is near freshwater, to salinities near 40, which is greater than seawater. But they thrive and do their best in salinities from about 10 to 25. So they like those mid-range salinities. And again, salinities in an estuary are always changing due to that mixing of fresh and salt water. But despite those changing salinities, we do see patterns. In the upper estuary, salinities are generally lower due to all the freshwater influences from the river and canals and watershed runoff. So salinities are generally less than 10. And as a result, we see fewer oysters in the upper estuary as shown on that diagram, because there are only a few that can tolerate those low salinity conditions. At the other end, in the lower estuary, salinities are generally much higher. They usually exceed 25. So we see high larval settlement rates and large numbers of small oysters. Oysters in the lower estuary don't survive as long, so we don't usually see very large oysters, or we don't see long-lived or oysters that live many years. In the middle estuary, this is where oysters are most numerous, and we see oysters of all sizes from spat all the way to large adults. And that's because salinities are more frequently in the preferred range of 10 to 25 in the middle estuary. Next slide, please. For now, we'll talk about oyster health. And as far as influences on oyster health and survival, salinity is the most important factor in Florida. And first, I want to explain how low salinity affects oysters, since it causes the most severe effects. When oysters are exposed to a prolonged period of low salinity, they become highly stressed, and this often leads to widespread death of the local population. It doesn't usually affect just a few oysters, it's the entire population in that area exposed to those low salinities. And this is because oysters are physiologically unable to tolerate low salinities for extended periods. So if this low salinity persists for too long, what ends up happening is oysters will close their shells, which stops feeding and respiration and eventually leads to death. Larvae and spat, so the younger oysters, are more sensitive to low salinities than adults. So we have seen cases in less severe events where the larvae and spat were lost, but the adults were able to survive and recover once salinities increased again. So the severity of the event has a lot to do with the timing and duration of the low salinity. Next slide, please. I also want to discuss the interaction of salinity and temperature, as it also affects the ability of oysters to survive and recover. So this species of oyster is found from as far north as Canada to as far south as Mexico. So in Florida, these oysters are found near their southernmost extent or distribution. And as a result, oysters in Southwest Florida are commonly exposed to temperatures near their upper tolerance limits. So oysters in Florida are exposed to temperatures that are among the highest the species can tolerate. This is important because this thermal stress can reduce an oyster's ability to deal with any additional stresses such as low salinity. Unfortunately, here in Florida, the late summer, early fall is when we have the highest temperatures and when we tend to see more tropical storms, which brings more fresh water that can lower salinities. So it's often the worst combination of high temperature and low salinity, and that time of year is definitely the most stressful for oysters in Florida. FGCU did a study in 2021 in the Caloosahatchee estuary that found that when temps exceeded 30 degrees Celsius, or about 86 degrees Fahrenheit, a low salinity event was much more devastating to the population than if that same low salinity event had occurred during the cooler winter months. Another consideration for oysters in Florida are those oysters that are intertidal, as shown in the picture here. If they're exposed during a low tide during the day in the middle of summer, the temperatures are probably going to get very high for those exposed oysters. And if there was a big rainfall event and salinities were to drop below 10 for a week or more, most of those oysters would not be able to survive the combination of those two stresses. And the last thing I want to mention on this slide is the SERP Recover Salinity Performance Measure, which has defined the optimal salinity range to sustain healthy oyster populations in South Florida estuaries. And they've defined that optimal range as 10 to 25, which you've heard me mention already. And they've also defined salinities from 5 to 9 or greater than 25 to be considered stressful, which would be the danger zone for oysters. And then salinities below 5 are considered damaging, where most of those oysters most likely won't survive. Next slide, please. So I've explained how low salinity and the interaction of temperature and salinity affects oysters. And we'll finish up this part with how high salinity affects oyster health. And believe it or not, high salinity can also negatively affect oysters. And that's because there are more parasites and predators in saltier waters, which means oysters in those environments don't usually survive as long. And a good illustration of this is shown by the two images at the top. On the right, these show infection intensities of a common oyster parasite called dermo in two separate oysters. So these images are microscopic slides magnified of oyster tissue, and the black spheres are the parasitic cells. On the left is an oyster that lived in a relatively optimal salinity environment with low infection intensity, so not very many spheres. On the right is an oyster that lived in a persistently high salinity environment with a very high and severe infection intensity. As far as predators go, one of the most prolific oyster predators is the oyster drill, which is shown in the picture in the bottom in the middle. This is a snail that can drill holes through the oyster's shell so that it can feed on the soft tissues. They're very abundant and prolific on an oyster reef. There are also animals referred to as shell pests. These animals don't necessarily feed on the oysters. They're sponges and clams that actually bore through the shells, which can weaken the oyster shell strength and integrity. Some examples of this are shown in the pictures on the bottom right. You can see the boring sponge holes in the shells. One of those shells has just one hole, but the NOAA image has multiple holes in that shell. So the last thing I'll talk about are those predators that can crack or bite open the shells like a crab or a fish to feed on the oyster. But imagine if that shell is already riddled with holes from a boring sponge, it's going to be even easier for those crabs to crack open those shells. So not only can shell pests make it easier for predators to feed on oysters, but oysters with a disease like dermo are also going to be more susceptible to predators. So in a high salinity environment, short-term salinity decreases, even when salinities are very low, can actually be beneficial to oysters because it temporarily reduces parasite and predator densities. So it gives those oysters a bit of a breather. So events like the big rainfall that occurred in the Big Cypress area last month may have brought enough fresh water to a high salinity area to give those oysters some brief relief. Next slide, please. So now we've discussed the important factors that influence oyster distribution and health in Southwest Florida. Now let's discuss why oysters are so important. And oysters are not only an animal that inhabits the estuary, but they also provide valuable ecosystem services. And they do this primarily by providing habitat and refuge for a variety of estuarine organisms. So the structure of an oyster reef is very three-dimensional. So there's lots of nooks and crannies for other animals to find habitat and shelter. Oyster reefs also provide food, whether it's the oysters themselves or the animals living on the reef or other predators. Oyster reefs also stabilize the sediment and can help prevent shoreline erosion. Oysters are filter feeders, so they can remove phytoplankton and particulates from the water column, which leads to improved water quality and clarity. And if clarity is improved enough, potentially sunlight can reach the bottom and maybe a seagrass bed can grow nearby. Oysters also provide the hard settlement substrate needed by newly settling oyster larvae. So not only do oysters provide all these valuable ecosystem services, but they also serve as a useful indicator species for estuary health. And that's because they need salinity and other water quality conditions that are suitable for oysters are also ideal for many other estuarine organisms. Next slide, please. So now that we understand why oysters are important, hopefully it makes sense that we monitor oysters to better understand how these environmental stressors affect them and the other estuarine organisms. So this figure just shows a summary of several stressors that can affect oysters, and we've already discussed most of them. We know that salinities that are too high or too low, high temperatures, low oxygen concentrations can all be stressful conditions for oysters. Oyster reefs can also be damaged by burial from silt and sediment that comes from watershed runoff and storms. And if oysters are stressed from poor environmental conditions like these, predation and disease can have an even greater impact, leading to a reduced number of oysters on the local reef. And if there's reduced oyster abundance, there are going to be less oysters available to spawn, which leads to fewer larvae in the water column and reduced larval settlement rates. So this leads to an overall reduction in the local oyster population, as well as a loss of those valuable ecosystem services provided by the oysters. So if you notice oysters disappearing from an area that you visit frequently, it's likely due to one or more of these environmental stressors that we've discussed here today. Next slide, please. So I'm going to finish up today by briefly mentioning some oyster monitoring efforts overseen by the district. The first is the SERP Recover Oyster Monitoring Program. And I know you're all familiar with SERP, but you may not be familiar with Recover, which is the monitoring arm of SERP. And it's focused on assessing the responses of the South Florida ecosystem to SERP restoration efforts. So oysters are just one of several indicator species used by Recover to look at the success of SERP. So the oyster program specifically is a long-term monitoring effort that monitors oyster populations in several South Florida estuaries, including the Caloosahatchee River estuary, which is the closest in proximity to the Big Cypress Basin area for this program. FGCU began monitoring in the Caloosahatchee in 2000, with FWC taking over that effort in 2017, and monitoring is ongoing monthly. Currently, they're monitoring at 4 stations in the Caloosahatchee, which is shown on the map with the black oyster symbols. And they look at several parameters at each station, including oyster density, so how many oysters are in a given area, spat settlement rates, and the prevalence and intensity of the dermal parasite. So how many oysters are infected and how bad are those infections? Results from this monitoring is not only used to inform the success of SERP restoration efforts, but they're also currently being used to help manage freshwater inflows from Lake Okeechobee to the estuaries so that we can better maintain salinity conditions that promote oyster survival and growth. Next slide, please. Another current monitoring effort that I'm aware of is being conducted by the city of Naples. They are currently doing oyster restoration on 5 acres in Naples Bay, and they're also monitoring in that same area to evaluate the success of those restoration efforts. And lastly, I want to mention the Picayune Strand oyster monitoring effort. This is also related to SERP, and there was a pre-restoration baseline monitoring conducted in the early 2000s by FGCU. In the 10,000 Islands area, specifically Blackwater Bay and Faka Union. Currently, there's no monitoring happening in the 10,000 Islands area, but it is planned to resume in 4 estuaries when construction is complete for Picayune Strand. 3 of those estuaries are considered altered estuaries. Those would be Blackwater Bay, Pumpkin Bay, and Faka Union. And the Fakahatchee estuary is considered a pristine or unaltered estuary that will be used as a comparison to those other 3 estuaries. So once construction is complete, annual monitoring will continue for 10 years post-construction. And for years 10 to 50 post-construction, monitoring will still continue, but it will be with a reduced frequency. I believe it's going to be about every 5 years. So stay tuned for updates on oyster monitoring in Picayune Strand. Next slide, please. That's all I have today. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I hope this has been informative and helpful. Please let me know if I can answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Parker. I have one question before we open it up for board comment. You finished up saying that the 10-year monitoring effort for post-construction at the Picayune Strand Restoration Project, and I'm familiar with those 3 bays. You know, it's almost like Goldilocks. One's too salty, one's not salty enough, and one's just right. So understand that principle. But what do we think right now in terms of a scientific hypothesis that we might find post-restoration? Do you have any ideas on that?
That's a little difficult for me to answer since I haven't worked in that area myself. But I would expect if they're restoring natural freshwater flows, we're going to start to see development of oysters that inhabit what we consider to be that middle estuary area. It's as long as there's substrate for them to settle in and grow. And they'll be able to ebb and flow with whether we're having a dry year or a wet year, moving further upstream or moving further downstream. So hopefully we'll see densities increase and stability increase with the oyster populations.
And that would in turn increase the quality of the water, which would be a
right.
good.
They'd start
Yeah,
providing more habitat for other estuarine organisms and all of the other benefits that come with that oyster reef.
Okay. All right. Any other board questions or comments for Dr. Parker? Ms. Smith, go ahead.
Okay. You gave some timelines, but really not a target date or whatever. Is there something to put in my head when we can actually have data that we can look at?
I did reach out to staff at the district that would know that, and they didn't have a concrete date to give me. So what I'm hearing is it's hopefully going to be pretty soon, within the next year or 2, I believe. And I apologize if I'm misspeaking, but I'm not directly involved with that project, so I had to reach out to others for that information.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Mr. Hill.
What's involved if to create artificial oyster mounds? Is there a legal process depending on where the waters are located? What's involved in that, and is that something the district can get behind?
There are permitting requirements if you're putting structures in the water. It really depends on what kind of substrate you're using for creating new reefs. You can do things as simple as putting loose shell out, bag shell, there's oyster domes, and depending on if it's navigational waters, things like that, there will be different permitting requirements. I don't believe the district has done any oyster restoration directly, but we've certainly worked with many other entities that have, like FWC and DEP and other local and county agencies.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
And I might add that the Big Cypress Basin was a partner with the Naples Bay project, with the city of Naples. So that's going well. And it's interesting, depending on the water body, there's a different approach to building those reefs because they do a little bit different approach up in Sanibel Captiva, where they have a little more latitude to just put in oyster shells and it's automatic recruitment. So there's different ways to do this. Troy, is there any public comment?
We have one registered speaker here in the room, Brad Cornell from Audubon Western Everglades.
Morning, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Brad Cornell. I'm here on behalf of Audubon Western Everglades and Audubon, Florida. Appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on this. This is a fascinating discussion and presentation from your staff. And I just wanted to flag two issues that are related to this that are implied by the presentation. The first is looking at the Caloosahatchee estuary and the Naples Bay estuary. The same issue comes into play. So if we want to see those estuaries improve in health, we need to get a restored regime for the whole watershed. So for instance, half of the water flow in the Caloosahatchee is from the watershed of the Caloosahatchee, not from Lake Okeechobee, half of it. And so if we want to see the salinity, which we just learned is the major factor in oyster survival, if we want to see that the oysters survive and increase water quality and make it better for seagrasses, we've got to get control of that watershed inflow, the tributaries. Same thing for Naples Bay. Think of the Golden Gate Canal system, which has been hooked to the Gordon River. So you have increased that watershed for Naples Bay from 12 square miles to 100 square miles with the Golden Gate system. And that has, as we know, created a freshwater pollution problem. So we've got to figure out ways to store more water in the watersheds. It's also a resiliency strategy in the district's resilience efforts. And we would like to see the district move even further. And a project I can point to is the Panther Walk project of Conservation Collier. It's what it's targeting is the Horsepen Strand. It's a Cypress slough in Golden Gate Estates. We need to be holding water in those wetlands in order not to dump them into Naples Bay. So wetlands are a big part of the answer. That's kind of the principle of Everglades restoration. The second point is just to point out a lot of the stormwater pollution, in addition to sediments, and the presentation highlighted the risk of sediments to oysters. Also, stormwater ponds, typically homeowners associations like to use copper sulfate. Copper sulfate is off the charts in Clam Bay. Why? Because copper sulfate has been used to kill algae. We need to look at that issue. I know it's an FDAX issue, but we do need to address it. So just wanted to flag those two issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. In regards to the copper sulfate issue that you mentioned, I've been trying to run that to ground to where we can have a positive conversation or a constructive conversation on that topic. It's a very complex issue on that, but I really feel confident that the interagency can work through that. But that's an excellent point. Do we know what the salinity level is in the Golden Gate Canal? If it's got any salinity at all?
It's freshwater.
Completely.
Mhm.
Okay. So I can see why that's a challenge. Any other questions from the board? Go ahead, Ms. McLeod.
Back to that, if I can get my glasses on. Is there a plan to divert some of the fresh water coming from the Golden Gate Canal into the Gordon River? Because I thought that there had been projects on the table and then taken back off, but anything new?
Nothing new unless Brad stands up or he his head at me.
Because there was the
We-
Bell Mead
Right.
project?
We have had several projects over the years of looking to store water in the estates, divert water. The county had a project that we worked with them on to divert water. And our biggest challenge is when we start storing water in the estates, it raises groundwater, which is then harmful to all of the homeowners' septic systems. So we've done several modeling projects trying to think of ways to change that. We looked at diverting water out of the Golden Gate Canal and sending it down Henderson Creek. Then what we found out when we did the modeling was when everybody's wet, nobody has room for water. When the Golden Gate Canal is too full, so is Henderson Creek. We don't have a place to put it. So we're still struggling with that issue.
So Brad, you bring that up, but I don't know if there's a solution because we've talked about it so much.
Did you want, I think you've been asked. Go ahead, Brad. You can come back up.
Just to tag on one thought is the conflict that Lisa is raising is we can address it partly. And this actually should be coming up in the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative, and that is looking at Shady Hollow Boulevard, for instance, as a small microcosm of the Golden Gate Estates. If we could collaborate with the county to convert those septic systems to central sewer, run a central sewer line down Shady Hollow, then you can raise the water levels in that area without conflicting with flood protection and not conflicting with septic systems. And now you've got an ability to store more water.
Do we know how many septic tanks are out there?
That is an area of the county where it's not seeing a lot of development. So you're looking at a few homes versus thousands. Now that system, I will say, drains down into our Cocohatchee system. We can put it into the Golden Gate. We've got our Cypress where we can send some water, but that particular area goes into our Cocohatchee area, not to Naples Bay generally. But the idea is the same, is if we can pick places where we can raise groundwater and not adversely impact the public, then we can store water or bring it up higher. The canal has the capacity. We're not near the top of the canal, so we can raise those levels.
Okay, so that's
yes.
solution.
And Brad is correct. That is something we're looking at. It's one of the items in the CWI project.
Okay. And then the other point, the copper sulfate in the lakes. So I hear about that in the city too. We have a lot of different lakes, mostly privately owned lakes. And I think that's what they're using. So if there is something that we can help educate the residents on about what better to use, I would love to hear that.
And this came up because we had a presentation from Florida Department of Environmental Protection on this and the monitoring of the water and what they were seeing with copper sulfate. And it's clear that there are some areas that are showing more copper sulfate than others, right? But it's an interagency issue, meaning we have to work it through the interagency, like because the Florida Department of Consumer Affairs and Services, right, has oversight over copper sulfate, right? So we have to work interagency to have this addressed. And I was looking to see if we couldn't do something with FDEP to do like a pilot or something just for Southwest Florida where this is an issue, not globally across the whole state.
Cool.
And it's been very challenging. Okay. So we're still in the process of doing that, but I don't have any real progress to report at this point. But I think the city of Naples at one point, and you might have been on council at this time, passed an ordinance to not use copper sulfate. And then they were told that they couldn't do that, right? Because somebody else had the authority for it. And I think it was FDACS at a higher state level. So we're trying to work through that, and we can discuss that in coming board meetings if you have some ideas and that kind of thing. But
Okay.
maybe we should circle back with FDEP on this topic, Lisa, and have them come back and see what has been done.
Yes. In fact, we've asked them to come back. I think we've got them on the schedule yet this year.
Okay, that'll be terrific.
Great.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great topic, but it's one that you can't move it forward fast enough, in
Right.
my view. There are hot spots, though, that show up in FDP's sampling. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Parker? Okay, thank you, Melanie. We'll move on to the next discussion item, which is the benefits of prescribed fire for the Picayune Strand Restoration Project. And we're very, very pleased to have Michael Joel, Caloosahatchee Forestry Center Manager for Florida Forest Service. And he's from the Florida Department of Agricultural Services.
I am. I don't oversee that. Sorry. I couldn't
Understand.
be able to begin to help you.
I understand, but it's great to have you here today. Thank you.
I just want to thank you. Thank you for inviting us. It's always a pleasure to come here. I always feel so much smarter when I come here too. I mean, coming after the doctor there, I don't know that I'll be able to shed as much light as she did, so bear with me here. I just want to talk briefly. Lisa asked me to come and talk about Picayune Strand and pick something to talk about inside Picayune. A big project we're really proud of is the prescribed fire that is finally taking place. And I say finally, it's been a long-term ongoing project to try to reintroduce fire into Picayune Strand. That's all my fancy stuff there. Lisa knows where I'm at if any of you ever want to get a hold of me. Picayune Strand State Forest is part of it is the PSRP. The main part of it is about 55,000 acres of it is. There is some that's outside of that restoration project that we're trying to introduce prescribed fire to, which has been a challenge over the years, which the restoration project, I'll explain a little more as we go on, is starting to help, and we are starting to be able to introduce fire there. Brief history on what goes on Florida Forest Service wise. Florida Forest Service oversees about 88,000 authorizations a year. We prescribe fire over 2 million acres a year throughout the state of Florida. We are a pro-burn state. Not every state in the United States is a pro-burn state, and a lot of that you see in the Western United States that goes on because they did stop. I'm a product of Southern California, born and raised, and for years in the 70s and 80s, they stopped prescribed fire because of smoke impacts in the greater Los Angeles area. But now the buildup of fuels, the long history of not having prescribed fire in there is starting to show, and we have catastrophic fires going on as we speak today. So the majority of those prescribed burns take place below I-4. So out of that 88,000, the majority of that is in Southwest Florida and South Florida, not just West Florida. And they usually happen anywhere between October and May. And a big portion of that is sugarcane. There's a lot of sugarcane. Sugarcane burns, they burn all the time. They burn all of their acres. We do authorize those burns as well. So a big portion of the prescribed burning that goes on in the state is down here. So did I push down, Lisa? Oops, I went too far. So when we're looking at prescribed fire, when we're trying to find the areas to burn, it is the most effective tool we have in our toolbox to manage these lands. There's other ways of going about it with mechanical fuel reduction, some chemicals. We're not big fans of chemicals. I know they use a lot of them on the planted pine up north, but in South Florida, we don't use chemicals, we use fire. And historic fire data has shown, the lands have burned before we came here, and they need to burn. We came in, we built homes, we drained the ecosystem, and we stopped burning. So we're trying to reintroduce that fire back into there, and it kind of becomes a challenge. And how do we do it effectively? How do we do it safely? And how do we do it in a way that benefits the ecosystem? Some of these plants are fire dependent. Wax myrtle is one that needs needs fire to reproduce. Pine cones, they don't release their seed until they have fire introduced to them. So natural regeneration in the forest, it needs fire. So how do we do that? How do we do it safely? How do we identify those areas? It's a big challenge. And we've been lucky enough in the past couple of years to have the restoration project is helping us get into areas and put water back on the ground where it needs to be and introduce fire in there in a safe manner. That wasn't there before. When it was drained, it was dangerous. It was high intensity fires. It was fires that destroyed the ecosystem. Even when we tried to control them, I've been here a long time, and we weren't able to control that fire the way we want to. It'd be real short window right after rainy season. You can get fire on the ground real quick, but after that, it got real dangerous, and we had a lot of damage to the trees, and we weren't benefiting it in the way we should. So the restoration project is showing all signs of helping us here. Go down. Prescribed fire in Picayune Strand last year was our best year that we have on record. We did almost 13,000 acres of prescribed fire in Picayune Strand. We did a big burn. That slide right there shows you a picture of just outside, just south of the FACA Union Pump and off to the east. And I'll have a helicopter picture here in a minute. And that was about 3,700 acres of fire that we got in there, and we got in there safely, and we got it in there effectively, and we got it in there when it was wet. And believe it or not, the Everglades burn, our type of fuel, it burns when it's wet. It'll burn right across the top of the water, the type of fuel we have here, and it needs it. And so we need that water on the ground. And so positive things are coming, and we're just so excited to do it. Picayune Strand, we try to burn about 10% of the forest a year. So that's our goal total on any state lands. Let me rephrase that. South Florida has a regeneration rate of very fast, very high. We get a lot of water down here. Our regeneration rate of fuels here, we could probably, I know Big Cypress Preserve is on a 5-year rotation. They try to burn their land. It's quite a bit faster than ours. And they have it on a healthy rotation, and we would like to get ours there. We shoot for a 10-year rotation to burn the whole forest every 10 years. So in that range there, to keep a healthy ecosystem is where we're shooting for. Our site determination and preparation. So our site determination, we're looking for the high returns when we go out and we search for these things. We're looking for the high fire dangers, especially in Picayune Strand. I'm speaking specifically there because it's in our backyard, but we're looking for those urban interfaced areas where we can keep the fire out of that urban interface. Anytime we get close to homeowners, they get real nervous, even when we're doing this in a controlled manner. So we're looking at how do we get the fire in there and keep that fire activity at a minimum so they don't see high intense fires. We're also looking at the areas where we really need to improve the habitat for the wildlife. So we do have one of the southernmost red-cockaded woodpecker clusters in the country. It's right here in Picayune Strand, and it's key. If that cluster goes, then that is the southernmost one in the United States, and then it declines. So we've been real diligent on how we put fire in there, that we do it safely, that we do it effectively, and that we do it in a time frame that benefits the birds. So there's quite a bit that plays into when we're picking these areas. And the woodpeckers do need that regeneration of new fuels for their foraging habitat. So that helps those birds survive. That is in the red-cockaded woodpeckers. This past year, we did a big burn inside of that cluster. We do mechanical fuel reduction prior to putting fire in there. So fire intensity, we want to keep the fire intensity down in these areas in the urban interface, in the woodpecker habitats, due to the fact that we don't want to lose any pine. We don't want any pine mortality in that area at all. So we go through there. It's very costly. It's very time consuming, but the benefit is needed. a lot goes on. I don't know if you've seen too many red-cockaded woodpecker clusters. They have a tendency of making a big, the sap from the tree tends to candle the fire up there. So we want to keep the fire away from those trees as much as humanly possible. So we mow around all those trees, we trim around them with weed eaters before we run the fire through there. So we want to do that in effective, and we want to do that in a time too when the birds are not breeding. So there's a little window that we have there when the weather lines up and the moisture lines up and the birds aren't breeding, that we can do this. So it's all done with a little bit of dancing. That is after we put fire through there. So you can see that if you look in the back, I wish I had a better picture, that it's a mosaic pattern. So in the back of the picture on the left, you'll see where it just didn't burn areas. We don't want to go through there and take all of the forage area for those woodpeckers. They're going to come back out at the end of the day and they're going to need to eat. So we need to keep that in a mosaic pattern as best as humanly possible. And that was the Colusa Pines RX in March this year. It was the first time fire had been introduced into that area that we have on record that wasn't a wildfire. So there was a wildfire that ran through there in would have been 2017, destroyed a lot of the habitat there. So this was the first time we were able to get fire in there on record, low intensity, good fire in a long time. We had 0 tree mortality in there. So we're pretty proud of that burn. Some of the tools we've needed and we started to use, that is a picture of a brand new helicopter we just took possession of the other day, sitting on the FACA Union pump tieback levee. And we use that to refuel the helicopter. We're using it to swap out crews, to put the balls back in there. Getting fire into Picayune Strand has become, without the roads, challenging, and we've had to adapt, right? We see that there's a great opportunity there. So we need to get fire on the ground, and the best way to do it, most effective and cost effective, you'd think it would be counter that, has been the helicopter burns. We did just take possession of a new drone. That I know you guys did too. I saw your drone pilot was at one of the trainings with our drone pilot. So hopefully we can piggyback there. Drones are going to be very effective on the smaller burns. This burn that we're going to show you in one slide was 3,000 acres. So the drone probably wouldn't work on a burn that size. The helicopter takes two fuel loads to get that done. So it takes about 6 hours. So it takes quite a bit of time in the helicopter. Other tools that we are utilizing is the communications, is the FACA Union. And I know when Lisa talked about towers, I have been talking about towers a lot lately too. I want to thank you guys and the team for getting us. I don't know if you're even aware, we have worked hard. Your team has worked hard to help us get a communications black hole, let's call it, in South Collier, and get a repeater put on that tower there. It is the team that you have. I know you probably already know this, but let me tell you, it is an amazing team, and I am very proud to work with them. And we are getting a repeater on that tower. It has been a long project. It's in legal now. We'll let legal handle it, but it is all done other than the legal speak. So it was amazing. I read it and I was like, I need to send this to legal. So our legal in Tallahassee has it and they'll send it back shortly. So thank you everybody for that. Some of the other tools, some of the funding that came through an agreement in the PSRP for the high water vehicles from South Florida Water Management, that is one. The funding came through last year, I believe it was, and we were able to purchase 2 of those. And I don't have a picture of the buggy because it's still in the shop, but we were able to purchase 3 high water vehicles to get access to those areas to get fire back into there where we need to. The water provides us both a help and a bit of a challenge, right? So we have to figure out how to work that best. And this is the tool we're using, and it's an amazing tool. That tool is being utilized for many, many, many things. Go forward on my cards. That tool is also used just the other day. We average about 8 emergencies inside of Picayune Strand a year. So ranging from lost hikers to major medical emergencies. And in order to access those people, we are utilizing these tools as well. So this has been just an amazing tool that we didn't have up until this point. So again, thank you, thank you. The outcomes have been so much more positive since we've had those, because sometimes the delay in getting to those people was just too long, waiting for the sheriff's helicopter to come. So thank you, thank you. Move on. Swamp buggies. Also, you can see this was running down the Faki Union Canal during that fire, and we were burning on both sides of this at one time. So you'd think, how are you doing that? But that, believe it or not, our fuels in South Florida burn. We use these wet canals to hold the fire, but inside the blocks, it still burned. So we're using these swamp buggies to access people, to get people in there to put fire on the ground, and also to keep the fire within inside the blocks and where we want to keep the fire. So it's just been such a great tool. There's another one coming. Those were purchased 2 years ago, and we have another one coming. It's in the shop right now. Also, the coordinated effort through resources has been a big tool. This was just a small burn we were doing, and you can see there's probably 25 people, 30 people, that doesn't count the helicopter crew, just to get 1,000-acre burn. So it's quite labor intensive, but the resources we utilized Big Cypress, South Florida Water Management, Rookery Bay, DEP, everybody comes together to achieve these burns inside Picayune Strand. And likewise outside, anywhere we go that they need help, we send people as well. So it's a great interagency effort. I loved you use those words a minute ago. It is key that we have those interagency and we work together as a team. So it's been great. So what we're trying to do with all of that being said is to get those high intensity fires to decrease. There's a long history of high intensity fires, mainly due to the cabbage palm and the drying of Picayune and what happened with the restoration project. We're hoping to see a decrease in that and getting fire into areas that we've never had fire in before. So if we can get prescribed fire in there on a routine basis, we'll be able to stop the tree mortality. We'll be able to stop the big high intensity fires. So we're seeing positive results. Last year was an amazing year, and we're going to continue. So the prolonged hydrological period in Picayune has increased our burning window as well. So we used to have a short burn window of just after rainy season, so early October to just around Christmas, and then it would shut off. But this year we were able to burn all the way into, it was a pretty moist year, so we were able to burn all the way into April. So we had great results. That gets more fire on the ground, the water staying on the ground longer. These are all wonderful things, and we're hoping to continue to see, the restoration project as a tool. You would think that would be counterproductive. We're putting water on the ground, we're not going to be able to burn, but it's not that. It's helping the burning, and the more water we have on the ground with the fuels we have, the better we are. That is a picture of the inside, also another portion of the RCW cluster that's down there after the burn went through. Amazing results, huge thanks to all our partners in making that happen. FWC was a huge partner in here. Those woodpeckers are, as many of you know, are so, there's so few of them. And again, this is the southernmost cluster. I think there might be one even more southernly in Big Cypress, but this is the furthest they go down in the United States. So this is a key cluster to keep healthy and happy. That was a fire along the side of I-75, also inside of an area that hadn't had any fire activity, good, bad, or indifferent, in over 50 years. And that was right where the underpass, that would called the Broken Wing area. Many of you don't know that, but underneath is the Panther underpass, and on the other side is Panther. We were able to get fire in there for the first time in any history that we have, and it was a great success, great burn, low mortality and we needed it. So yeah. Any questions on the burn program?
Thank you for the excellent presentation. Board questions? Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
How do you communicate to consumers and homeowners that you're going to have a prescribed burn, especially close to their locations?
So we put out a press release every day before. There is a massive email that goes out, not just from my agency, but also from the local. So we communicate with the Collier County EOC. We communicate with all the fire departments, the law enforcement. Sometimes we put signs out. We blanket the area. It is a huge concern. That is a big drawback. One of the big problems, and it was shown in the 70s and 80s in California, is the smoke impact, right? So we can't shy away to say that this won't be an impact. So how do we mitigate that? We try to do smaller burns or burns that are on good dispersion days when we have good lifts. So communicating is letting them know that, hey, this is going to come, this is going to happen. We're going to do it hopefully quickly and get it out of the way. So we push the press releases as much as possible.
Social media.
Everything we can do, every avenue we utilize.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. McLeod?
Private property owners, do they have a right to burn, and are you giving them the rights?
We do.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
Okay, so we are a pro burn state. You have a right to burn your property. You are, as long as you do it within in a fashion that meets the setbacks and the standards for FDACs in the state of Florida. We are out. I had a call this morning. There's a person that wants to burn 5 acres on 29. And so I sent a supervisor out there to talk to that person today. So if it can be done effectively and it can be done safely, yep, we are all about doing it. But we only authorize now. We pick and choose the days and the times when we authorize. So these people have to call in daily. Our dispatch center is very busy, 88,000 authorizations. So that's a busy dispatch center getting calls every day. And we don't authorize every day. So we authorize acreage, piles. So it just depends on the day, the weather, the fuel type you have. If you meet the qualifications, are you a certified burner? So there is also class schooling and everything you have to go through to do this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
And we'll even help. So we have a program that if we have time and the resources, we are happy to come help, and it's minimal money too.
Okay. Thank you.
I just have a response to that.
Mhm.
Ms. McLeod, Park Shore is not going to let you burn.
No.
On my quarter acre.
I know what she's thinking. You're not
The
kidding.
smoke impact areas also have the hospitals, highways. So that picture right there was a hard burn to do. That's I-75, and that's a smoke sensitive area. So in order to do that, you have to do that with a specific weather set of parameters on a specific day. You have to have all your moons and suns and stars line up to do that. That was a tricky burn. So yeah.
Yeah, that photo is so impactful because of what it took to line that up.
Line that
All
up.
the stars were aligned that day. Go ahead, Vice Chair Waters.
2 questions. One is in terms of private property, do you have in-holdings within Picayune, or is it okay?
We have about 40 homes inside of Picayune Strand State Forest that sit outside of the PSRP, and they were not part of the whole project. So they sit just the other side of the tieback levee and off to the west.
Gotcha. And then second one is a picture like this. How long does it take for something like that to burn out? Is it primarily real smoke intense at first, where you know day to day what the wind condition is going to be, and then it may still burn and not be as smoke intensive, so you're not worried about it going back to the interstate? Or
So we
how does that
plan
work?
these, yeah, very good question. We plan these, we're looking at weather, not just the day of the burn, we're looking at weather week after the burn, because we can't have this fire turn around and this smoke impact the interstate the next day either. So we're looking at lining up our stars well in advance and putting the tools in place to get that fire on the ground and get it out as quick as humanly possible. Because at night, the dispersions will crash and then the smoke will come back towards the highway. So it's a delicate dance that we have to do. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there any public comment, Troy?
Yes, Madam Chair, Brad Cornell, and it's perfect timing as he has to leave.
Thank you, Brad Cornell with Audubon. I'm sorry, I have to leave because I'm sharing a car with my wife, and that's the way it is. So, just wanted to echo Mr. Joel's comment about the relationship between hydrologic restoration and prescribed fire and a healthy fire ecology. So that is absolutely, from our experience on our 13,000 acre sanctuary at Corkscrew Swamp, that is absolutely a huge factor. And And I also want to be very complimentary of the Forest Service and of the district and crew for the collaboration that happens when we burn. So our burn team really relies on that collaboration that you described, Mr. Joel, very well. So it's definitely a team effort, and the stars definitely have to align, and they don't very often, unfortunately. So, and the other thing I just wanted to flag was the cabbage palm issue in Picayune Strand. So we have had a problem with figuring out how to protect those RCW clusters in the Picayune, in the Belle Meade part of the Picayune Strand. And so the solution has been, as you may know, to leave a portion of Miller Boulevard as a levee, basically, so that water doesn't flow over there. But one of the challenges to that is that we have a lot of cabbage palms, which I have heard some folks talk about them as matchsticks because they bring fire into the canopy of the pines and kill them. That's not what we want to see. So the Army Corps is planning to remove cabbage palms from about 550 acres in Picayune Strand, I believe. They're budget constrained because this is the fourth quarter. And so they're looking for money to do that. They don't have it yet, unless you know differently. That is something we want to support them on. And if they, I need to get a hold of Steve Basin and ask him, what do you need to get this done? Because that's kind of a key factor in addition to the hydrologic restoration to make sure these RCWs can stay where they are. So just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for doing that, Brad. Mr. Joel, I had a question regarding these 88,000 authorizations issued. Because as I travel throughout the ranch lands and everything else, everybody's talking about burn permits, right? And the district as well. Give me some context for that number. Is 88,000 a lot?
It's a lot. That's where we are one of the biggest burn programs in the country. We push burning. We are pro burning. Burning is needed. It is natural. It has always taken place. We also are the Department of Agriculture. So we are pro burning when it comes to sugarcane. And sugarcane probably, and I don't have those statistics, I could get them for you. Sugarcane authorizations in my office, I'll speak for my office, probably is 2/3 of our daily authorizations in our office. And I'm in charge of Southwest Florida. So Henry County is our only county that has sugarcane, and that still counts for 2/3. Quite massive burn program goes on in the center of the state right there. So
if you take what goes through your office, 88,000 goes through the central dispatch at the state level, right?
divided up. There's 15 districts. I'm one of those districts. So through that 15 districts in the state of Florida, so probably 250 authorizations a day happens in the state of Florida. And majority of those that would just be an average if I did my math in my head right. And the majority of those probably take place between October and April. So there's when the sugar cane's going to.
Now, roughly how many go through your office?
We go through, we probably do 60 burn authorizations a day in our office.
Wow.
Yeah. And during sugarcane, probably over 100, well over 100. And Palm Beach probably does twice that, if not 3 times that, just because of the amount of sugarcane over in Palm Beach County.
And those aren't easy things to do. It's more than just giving an authorization. You're having to check so many things, just like you shared with Board Member McLeod. I mean, to do a prescribed burn, you have to be sure that everything's going right. So that's a lot of activity just in that alone. In managing the land within the Picayune State Forest, what are your limitations to doing it? Is it budget? Is it just tools in your toolbox? Are there any limitations, or can you manage it exactly how you want to?
For a long time, it was budget. We've seen with Mr. DeSantis in office and Commissioner Wilton Simpson in office, we have seen a massive turnaround in our budget. And I cannot say enough good things about the turnaround in the past 5 years we've seen take place. So the tools are lining up. The funding is there. For a long time, Picayune was drained, and a lot of that was the draining of Picayune and limited the fire activity. So where now I can do that fire, which that fire you're looking at there, I want to say was 2,500 acres. We were doing fires very small. In order to keep them small, we were having to do 150-acre fires. And that just takes too much time to try to get that acreage burn at 150 acres at a time. You couldn't do it until they finally put the water back on the ground with the restoration project. We couldn't get fire in Picayune. It just wasn't possible. You had to keep them small. And if you didn't keep them small, they got up and they ran away from you, and we had all kinds of containment issues. So we always, for years, my first years here, a good day burning would be 125 acres. Now we're pushing 4,000 acres in a day. So it's been a great increase. That we could go on and on. So the restoration and what the gentleman was talking about of removing the palms, we've also done over 500 acres this year of palm removal inside of Picayune Strand, on top of the 500 acres the Corps is doing. So everybody is pushing in the same direction to get control of this palm and try to, solve this problem. Because the palm came in when we drained, essentially when they drained Picayune, and that's become now an invasive native. And yeah, it's become a big problem. So the palm is another holdback.
I really enjoyed it. It was very informative, my visit with the Park Service out there, and I certainly enjoyed that. And I've been out with my land management folks at the district as well. And that's the key, is they remove these invasives, and cabbage palm is one of those, and they're doing all sorts of test plots to see what's the most effective way. As they go through removing them, then those acres have to be in land management. And that's what I'm kind of asking with you, because it's kind of an interagency partnership here out there in the Picayune, and I'm wondering what your limitations are. I had been hearing it was the budget, because you're not budgeted to do land management in the way that it needs to be done. And I'm just trying to clarify that, if that is in fact, if I'm still on solid ground, or is money starting to flow and we need more money, or what do you need?
So that's a complicated question. Okay, Senate Bill 1638 just came into place. 1638 was the Indian casino gaming revenue. And now they gave us $32 million to FDAX this year for land management specific projects. That money just came out July 1st. I don't happen to have that in my budget yet. I saw it. There's a line item there. And so we really don't know. We know we have a windfall of money. We don't know what it's going to be next year, because it's predicated on what casino gaming takes place. But we have been told through Governor DeSantis, that it is reoccurring. So we are just looking at this now. We're all looking at each other. So we have a meeting Wednesday set to say, how much can we, because you just hit the nail on the head, how much can we actually bite off and chew, right? So we know we need to do what we need to do, and what we can actually do are probably going to be two different things. So if we go through and remove all those palms, but don't do exactly what you said, put it in land management, in 5 years with the regeneration here, we're going to be right back to done nothing. So we need to get a hold of, as a team, how do we do it? So everybody's pushing in the same direction and trying to get a good idea of it. So we've gone to contracting this out. Most of our palm mastication that took place this year was all done through contractors. So we're just contracting it out in-house, just not cost effective. We don't have the manpower to do it. So we're looking at just contracting this out. So
Yeah, it's very important. And I think the hydrology or the hydrologic changes will help some, but it doesn't make sense to use taxpayers' money to remove the invasives, right? And then let them all come back.
Exactly.
And if this is very very hopeful that you're going to get some part or all of that money.
It's great. Yep. And we're 1/10 of all the state lands in my district, in my center, we're 1/10 of all the state land. So if you can do the math of 32 million, I'm hoping to see 1/10 of that 32 million. And it all is to be spent not on fire. It's all to be spent on public land. So it's just such a windfall for us, which hasn't in the past happened. So we're very lucky. We're very blessed, and we're also now looking at each other like, okay, how do we do this? How do we do it correctly? And
And-
how do
and
we partner with our partners to
Yeah.
do this and be effective on it? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you hit that nail on the head. A year from now, it's water management, us and FWC all looking at picking a strand on how do we manage that
Mhm.
project and do it correctly. You know, we're going to
Mhm.
have a huge, so I'm very excited.
And just for comparison, what is your budget right now for that?
For my budget, total operating budget for Caloosahatchee is right around $1 million. And that doesn't
Okay.
count the new money that's coming in. That's a new,
Yeah,
Oh.
and that it's be a smaller percentage what you have to land manage, right?
much smaller. So that would be
Yeah.
like 3 different budgets. So they're broken into have different state force. We all
Right,
have,
so this would be a big boost to
Big
you, especially if it keeps coming.
correct.
This is really good information because I didn't put 2 and 2 together, but you've just done it for the board and for me and that's hopeful because now I see some guarantees that once we do all this work, it's going to be safeguarded.
Correct.
And
we do
that's,
it and we do it correctly and we put the science behind it and we do it effectively and we do it as a team.
yeah, that's great. And I'm probably one of the few board members or probably the only board member that's had experience with prescribed fire and red cockaded woodpecker. So I really, my hat's off to you for the challenges you had. And I didn't have any I-75. So
Yeah.
burning right up against that, it's got to keep you up at night, right?
Yeah. Oh, it does. Yes.
Yeah.
You stress. Yes.
Mhm.
If I could have just one moment on a sidetrack here. So I want to tell you a little story. Lisa told a little story and I want to tell you a story as well. I met with Commissioner Wilton Simpson this fall and he sat down with the leadership. Again, there's 15 of us and he sat down with us and he said, I really want you guys to focus on your interagency relationships. I really want you to work on your government partnerships with your water management districts. And I thought to myself, if he's having to say that, that's not good somewhere. And I am so proud of the team you guys have here and working with the team you have. My first year as a manager has been nothing but a blessing. They are helpful. They're informative. They have been great. And I was like, I wish Mr. Wilton Simpson knew what a wonderful team we have down here and you guys do. So I just wanted to let you know that probably isn't going on in the rest of the state and that's none of my business, but I know your team is amazing to work with.
Well,
and I
that's
just want to thank you. for
fantastic
that.
to hear and to have you say it in a public meeting
Thank
means
you.
the world.
I'm
Thank
so
you.
proud of the team here. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for him? Okay, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. Okay, moves us to the fiscal year 2024-2025 proposed tentative budget and submission of our proposed millage rates. And we have Ms. Candida Heater on Zoom. Hi, Candy.
Good afternoon. Thank you. So for today's presentation, I will start with a small timeline to briefly go over, some key dates that we still have to check the box for completion of the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget process. We'll work through the millage rate, a brief budget in brief, as well as then at the very end, I will be requesting a motion to approve a request to the District Governing Board of proposed fiscal year 24-25 millage rate and tentative budget. So the milestones, after today, we do have a statutory requirement of August 1. August 1 is where we are required to submit a tentative budget to the governor and the legislature. The budget that we are discussing today, if approved by you, will be included in that August 1 report that will be submitted on August 1. We then come back before you on August 23rd for your final millage rate and fiscal year 24-25 budget approval. Then we move into September. September, there will be 2 public hearings. at the South Florida Water Management District. September 12th will be the tentative, and then the 24th, the final, of which the Basin's millage and budget will be included in both of those meetings. So for the millage rate, today, the millage rate that is being proposed before you is 0.0978 mils. That is $9.78 per $100,000 of taxable value. Therefore, a home owner that has a home valued at $500,000 would pay an estimated $48.90 per year. We've listed on the slide a few of the services that these funds do cover within the Big Cypress Basin's area of responsibility. Next slide, please. So for the budget portion of the presentation, the current budget for the Big Cypress Basin for fiscal year 24-25 being proposed today is $22,006,945. It is a $6.88 million increase. That is a substantial looking increase, $6.8 million. But what is included in that $6.8 million is $2 million for the design of the Gordon and Palm River structure replacements, which brings with it its own funding source. So there is funding through an agreement with the county, Collier County, that will fund the design and construction and future operations of the Gordon and Palm River structure. What that means is that this project does not bear any impact on the basin's revenues, meaning your ad valorem revenues. The two areas that are a part of your basin's ad valorem increases is within the construction, design and construction of several of your projects within your capital plan. And they are listed here on the slide, such as the communication systems improvement, the Golden Gate Canal, Weir number 5, etc., as well as the Bird Rookery Boardwalk design, build, parking lot facilities, parking lot and restroom facility improvements. So these two bullet points, the construction and of the capital plan, as well as the Bird Rookery, is what is consuming the increases of the ad valorem revenue based on the millage rate, as well as some of your balances, your fund balances. And we'll see that in the next slide. So this next slide shows the progression of the development process, where we start with the adopted budget, and then we provide a preliminary budget, which is statutorily required for by January 15th of each year. And then over the February to June months, we then fine tune the plan, which is the tentative budget. So moving from the adopted to the tentative budget, there are some increases in revenues as well as the usage of your fund balance. So as mentioned previously on this slide, where you see that there is a $2 million increase in additional revenue for the Collier County Cooperative Agreement, and that is, a new revenue that you do not see or do not have in your adopted budget. And that, as I had mentioned, is what's offsetting that part of that $6.8 million increase for those two structures. Also, the Big Cypress Basin ad valorem tax revenue is projected to be or yield an additional $1.3 million. That, as well as we increased your investment earnings by about $140,000. And then the increase in the usage of your fund balance from your adopted budget was $2 million, which is your emergency reserves. And then in the tentative, it's shown at $5.4 million, which includes $2 million of your emergency reserves, and then the $3.4 million, which is the increase that is helping fund the items that were mentioned previously in your capital, as well as the Bird Rookery Boardwalk design build project. Next slide, please. This slide has, once again, showing the progression of the process from the adopted to the preliminary and then to the tentative. Noticing on this slide that your expenditures are balanced, meaning they equal the same as your revenue, which is a requirement that you have a balanced budget. The tentative budget of $22 million, comparing the various categories that are within the pie chart under the tentative budget portion, illustrates a $4 million increase in your capital projects from 4.2 to 8.2 million. And that again is made up of those projects that were on the slide 3. Your reserves remains the same. The water quality projects remains the same. And then you see the $2 million increase for the Gordon and Palm River structures as a usage of the revenue that was a $2 million increase on the previous slide. The land stewardship is about a $1.7 million increase, and that is what it is made up of the boardwalk as well as the facilities and parking lot that was mentioned previously. And then you had some reductions, some offsetting reductions within the modeling and the service center staff categories, and that is due to in the current year adopted budget and the funds that carried over, on contracts from 23 into 24. There were savings once contracts were closed out, POs were closed out, and then once staff started implementing the plan, for fiscal year 24, there were savings realized. So therefore, we were able to reduce those areas and some of those line items because we were able to cover them in this year's budget. Next slide, please. So this brings me to the final slide where I will request a motion for approval to establish a proposed millage rate of 0.0978 mils per $1,000 of taxable value and proposed fiscal year 24-25 tentative budget of $22,006,945. Thank you.
Thank you, Candy. Board members, any questions for Candy?
I have one.
Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
So Candy, just to verify, the millage rate hasn't increased, correct, from last year?
That is correct. It is the same millage rate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Candy? Is there any public comment, Troy?
I have no registered speakers here in the room and no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. With that, if there are no other questions for Candy, if I could have a motion, and the motion is on the screen for this item, and a second to approve the proposed millage rate.
Motion so moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve a request to the District Governing Board to establish a proposed millage rate of 0.0978 mils per $1,000 of taxable value and proposed fiscal year 2024-2025 tentative budget of $22,6,945. With that, I'll call the roll. Vice Chair Waters?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. McLeod, Ms. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Romano,
Yes.
and I vote yes. That's passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Candy.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to board comment. We'll go ahead and start with Ms. Smith.
I really don't have any board comment except for to thank everyone for all their hard work. I just have a reminder about my, our BCB and Naples Area Board of Realtors, water quality cleanup day is Thursday morning. And thank you, Andrew, for taking out a boat of about 4 workers to pull debris out of the Green Canal. So if anybody is interested in and still wants to show up or sign up, I guess you can just show up. You can do so. I think we posted it somewhere, but it is going to be the Henderson Creek Canal, which runs by Collier Boulevard and on north and south. And if you want to show up at the public shopping center at Collier Boulevard, 951 and Rattlesnake Road at 8 o'clock, I'd love to see you there. That's all I have. Thank you.
How many people do you have signed up?
I think it's around 30.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
The last minuters.
That's great. And at our last meeting, I told you that I wanted to be sure that I had a chance to attend. But then when I looked at my calendar, I have a governing board meeting in West Palm Beach on Thursday. So I'm going to have to decline this time, but I hope next time that I'll be able to show my support and to be out there with you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hill?
I got something that's kind of interesting. As most of you have spent some time with me know that I like to get rid of pythons. And Dusty, the Python wild man who has set up a new business in Everglades City. I saw some, basically, in case you're not familiar with what he does, is he's caught, I believe it's 8,500 pythons over the last couple of years and turning it into a business and turning them into various things, handbags. I have a wallet, belts, you name it. And he's setting up a new store next to his pizza place, which God knows why he got into that. But anyhow, it's going to be really neat when it gets finished, probably by the next time we meet in August. And I did actually see some of his new products. And I think our chair would look really good with that, with the new purse, the Wrangler Python purse that I saw. I think so. There's some really neat things that go beyond what he has done in the past. Earrings, pretty much everything that the snake, when they harvest a snake, they use just about everything, including down to some of the fats that create some soaps. So it is very interesting. That's the only thing I have for value in our comments today. Thank you.
Vice Chair Waters?
Nothing for me. Thanks.
Ms. McLeod?
Nothing for me.
Mr. Romano?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Great. I got a couple of items for you. First of all, I had a chance to visit Bird Rookery Swamp, the 12-mile loop with crew. And I'd offer that to you if you have a chance to get out there and see the work that's been done with the district team, our land managers, and the Crew Land and Water Trust working together out there to make some repairs. First of all, we're replacing some old culverts underneath the actual route throughout that swamp. And we also, the district purchased benches, and then the volunteers from the Crew Land and Water Trust actually installed them along the trail. And it was so hot that day, there were several hikers out there sitting on the new benches. So they're well received. And I want to thank Bob Lucius and his volunteers at the Crew Land and Water Trust for their partnership with not only the bench installation, but some of the work that he's doing out there. Some of the, if you remember our presentation that we had from him a while back, we had a discussion about maybe some of his volunteer educators attending the Florida Master Naturalist Program. And they have supported that, and they've got them going to the Florida Master Naturalist Program on a select basis, you know, a few, and they're incorporating that into the educational value. So I was pleased with all of that, and you can see on our budget that we just approved and our millage rate that we've got a project, a very important project out there. So if you haven't had a chance to visit Bird Rookery Swamp and walk the 12-mile loop, please take advantage of it, especially in this nice, cool weather that we're having. That fits into what Lisa mentioned, which is the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative. And last week, we kicked off the public meeting for this effort, and it's a huge regional effort. I mean, we're looking at the entire watershed, and some people fondly refer to this as SERP 2.0, right? Because it's the entire Southwest Florida watershed. And the goal of this is to create projects that will improve the wetland habitat within the 13,000 acre Audubon's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, but also the greater Corkscrew regional ecosystem watershed, all without creating additional flood risk or impacting our water supply. So it's huge because I think it's about 80,000 acres in the entire watershed. And this directly impacts what you'll recall from Audubon's presentation to us about the hydrology of Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary and wood stork nesting. So while this is a 3-year study, the technical working group has been charged with actually finding things we can do now. So if they can find something that we can put into effect now, they're encouraged to do so. So the hybrid meeting was well attended, and we even had representatives from Senate President Kathleen Pasadomo's office who attended, and Representative Lauren Mello attended as well. So great support for this, and it's something that's very, very exciting that we can be proud of as a board. And I hope that if you're not up to speed on it, that you'll get a little bit more involved with what we're trying to do there. 5 years ago, the Florida Cattlemen's Association reached out to me, and they, as you know, they meet annually here in Collier County. They have their conference here at the Mariana and Marco Island. And unlike any other conference I've ever attended, they bring their families. And the youth of the Cattlemen's Association is the junior cattlemen, and they have a junior leaders group. So when Gene Lawless was the president of the Florida Cattlemen's Association back then, they were looking for a stewardship connection so that the youth could go out and do something to give back to the environment and the community while they were here on our coast attending the conference. So that partnership was established between Rookery Bay and the junior leaders of the Cattlemen's Association. And this year I went out with them to Key Waden Island, where we did trail cleanup and beach trash cleanup ahead of the 4th of July event, holiday. And so they were just incredible, working so hard to clear the overgrown trails. So you know how the boats transit from the inland side to the Gulf side. And they just did a lot of great work. So I wanted to give them a shout out and also let you know what they did inside the basin to help our environment and our community. And one last thing that I have to bring your attention to, I'm not sure if you have heard of or are familiar with the Everglades Foundation program on Everglades literacy in champion schools. This is an amazing program. And just recently, I want to say in the last year or two, I'm not sure what the time frame, they hired their education literacy coordinator for Southwest Florida. Her name is Tate Vangello. And I had the opportunity to go to a teacher training session at Rookery Bay, and the teachers were K through 5, I think, this group. And they went out on a kayak trip in the morning for look at the estuary and learn about Rookery Bay. And then in the afternoon, they got introduced to the Everglades ecosystem and the lessons that they could incorporate into their STEM curriculums at their schools. And everything is provided for these teachers, including all of the supplies that go with this program. And this year, just a couple months ago, I was honored to be a part of their recognition for champion schools. And I would offer this to you. I know that you move a lot through the community and you meet people, but take a look at this program on the Everglades Foundation website if you have some time. And if you're moving among circles that you bump into teachers or you bump into parents or you bump into curriculum, because the Everglades is in our backyard. And this is the future generation that's going to carry on for us and to protect the Everglades and pass along what it's good. And you wouldn't believe the stewardship projects that these schools are doing, the ones that are involved in the program. And we've had some schools here in Collier County achieve a first by being a champion school this year. So check it all out and see what you think and pass the word if you think it's a good thing to do. So that's all I have. And with that, we'll go to the technical reports and we'll begin with Andrew Wolf.
Good afternoon. Andrew Wolf, the superintendent of the Big Cypress Basin Field Station. And today I'll be doing field station operations and pump station operations, maintenance activities, and a 3-month look ahead. One of the biggest things that happened was in May, we got our new grade all in. This has been on order for, I believe, 8 months. As you can see here, Dre, our operator, is out by GG3 digging out some stumps, just testing it out and getting the feel for it before we take it out on a narrow canal bank. As you can see, it's on tires. So what's nice about it is we can drive it to the site, use it, and then drive it back. Our old grade all, which is over 25 years old, is on tracks, and we have to have a lowboy haul it out to the job site. And finding a place to drop a 55-foot lowboy with a grade all is usually a challenge. So this will be a welcome piece of equipment, which you'll see later in the presentation. We've put it to use. We've also got our new Ford Lightning in, which is only about a week old, so really don't have much feedback on it. But next meeting, I'm sure we'll have some thoughts on it. But it's a very nice vehicle, and we'll see how it works out. We've continued with our SIP inspection repairs, and on the left is a contractor working on the exhaust at Cocoa 2 structure. And on the right is divers doing above water and below water repairs at Henderson Creek. Some of it is out of our scope, what our field station people can do. So we hire contractors, especially the underwater. This was before the heavy rains. So now we're going to wait till the water recedes a little bit to get them back to finish off the repairs. And our our personnel has been doing SIP repairs. See on the right, we replaced some faded signs. On the left, doing some work on 951 structure. We're also in the middle of automating 951 North structure. On the left, you'll see we're digging a conduit in from the stilling well back to the structure. This is the first step, so the structure can basically talk to the stilling well and get the information. We're hoping to have within the next month or two, have this fully automated and be online. And vegetation removal, especially before the rain event, the canals were low and you could see every piece of vegetation. So we have a lot of complaints about vegetation beforehand, but we just worked through it until we get more rain, and now the vegetation looks pretty good. So, in preparation for the rain event, we removed the V notches at Miller 2, Faka Union 6 and 7. On the left is a V notch. Is what it is it goes into a fixed weir and holds water back during the dry season. So during the wet season, you want to pull those out so you can get more capacity in the canal for storage. And on the right, we're using a boom truck to pull them out. So you definitely want to do it before any storm events, any lightning or any rain. It's much easier to take them out. So we did this on Monday before the event. For the event, as you see on this chart here, these are all gate changes that were performed during the event. The OCC is the automated ones, which the water managers can do with their computers. And then the BCB field station ones are the ones we have to send personnel out to make changes. And you see there was 52 manual gate changes. This just reconfirms that we need to keep automating these structures. That's a lot of gate changes within those few days. And when it's storming out, you definitely don't want to be doing gate changes. Our water managers are very good about that. They give us plenty of time to, make adjustments to the structures when it's not lightning out or anything like that. So we do it safely. On the left, you'll see Francisco was pulling some debris out of one of our structures. We checked every structure before the rain event to make sure there was no debris blocking the discharge at any structure. And below on the left is some of the manual structures that we have to adjust. That's Cork 3, and that's our new contract inspector, Laura Adams, learning how to do gate changes. And on the right is GG6 with Willie and Francisco. You see you have to take a generator and basically a large drill, it's called a piggyback, out on the structure. You definitely don't want to be doing that during a lightning storm because of all the metal in the generator. After the rain event, we had multiple washouts. You see on the left, this is on Cork Canal. And basically the water will build up beside our canal banks. And once it starts overflowing into the canal, it's mostly sand in this area, and it'll just take out a large section. But with our new grade all, we can just back it down the canal bank, level off of the dirt, and anything that goes into the canal, we can just swing over and pull it right back out of the canal. So it works very well. On our 3 months look ahead, we're going to continue with SIP repairs. We're trying for 100% by October 1st. The Henderson Creek Tree Project starts today. They are probably mobilizing today and start tomorrow. We're going to complete the automation of 951 and respond to wet season gate changes. For our SERP program, we reassembled the second number 2 pump at Merritt Pump Station and did a vibration test on the pump. It passed and it's back in service. Unfortunately, one of our low flow pumps, the pump shaft broke. So Southeast Pump has, along with our personnel, came out and removed the pump. It's at their shop right now. They're evaluating how much it's going to be to rebuild the diffuser and see if the prop has any damage. We don't really know how long it's going to be out of service, but luckily it's a low flow, so it's not as important as one of the diesel pumps. So we'll see what at our next meeting, I'll give you an update on the cost and how long it's going to be out of service. We're doing SIP repairs at Merritt. Contractors are painting the fuel farm pipes as part of one of the deficiencies found with the SIP inspections. New shaft seals were put in at Merritt and Miller. On the left is the older steel design, which obviously steel corrodes in a wet situation out there. The new ones are made out of stainless steel, which should potentially last forever. At our Fauquier Union pump station, we had environmental science students from Palmetto Ridge High School come out. Forestry set up a tour, and Fauquier Union was our first stop of the tour that day. On the left is Ethan Baldino talking about how the maintenance of the forest as far as exotic vegetation and like that. We also gave him a talk on the pump station design and how the pump station works, and the spreader basin, how it spreads the water out. And I think it's very important that these kids, learn about Picayune and the pump stations and that. And because that's, like Ms. Roman said, it's our future. That's going to be our future leaders there. And our 3-month look ahead is respond to wet season pump orders, fix the broken low flow pump at Merritt, continue SIP repairs, and continue training new employees at the pump station. Our last new employee starts this Thursday, which is actually a transfer from Miami. So we're full up at the pump stations. We'll still have 2 openings at the field station, but at least be full at our pump station for pump season. And every meeting I highlight the hazard that animals have out at the pump stations. I think last month was a panther at Merritt, and then there was an alligator in the fuel farm at Faca. This time, this wild animal came into Miller Pump Station, and our operator, Josh, fed it and took it to a veterinarian and found it wasn't chipped. So he adopted it and it's doing good.
That is so sweet.
Just another animal hazard. And other than that, any questions?
All right, thank you, Andrew. Questions for Andrew?
I have a question, Andrew.
Sure.
The pump that's out, how big a deal is that in the scheme of the SERP water flows?
It's a low flow pump, so it basically, when the water gets down to where it needs to be kept, it just kind of keeps it in check.
Okay,
So there's still one more backup to it,
okay,
which I did not mention that we are ordering another pump shaft for that pump because the pump that is broken has 16,000 hours on it. The other pump has the same amount of hours. So if it breaks, we'll have a spare to fix that one. If it doesn't, this dry season, we'll be replacing that pump shaft
okay.
just as a preventive.
Andrew, I want to thank you and your entire team for all their hard work. Those are a lot of gate changes that you showed, and they did their work just as professional as they always do, but great job all the way around. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
Okay, Brad Jackson for the water conditions report.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Brad Jackson here for your water conditions report since our last board meeting back in April. So as I usually do, I'm going to give an overview of the kind of conditions in our area. I want to spend some time highlighting our June rainfall and the event that's been talked about so much today. So to start off here, we've got our 2024 rainfall summary. The takeaways in this slide, you can see the big outlier there is June, where we've come in with over 17 inches of rain that fell in the month of June. So that definitely gave us a surplus for the year so far. We're looking at about 32 inches from January through the 2nd when I ran, or I'm sorry, through the 6th when I ran the rainfall yesterday. So that's half of our year's worth of rainfall already, and we still have most of the wet season to go in front of us. So that does put us at a surplus of about 8.5 inches so far this year, and that trend, we'll see how it continues as the wet season progresses. But I want to rewind just for a second here. I won't spend too much time here. It feels like forever ago now on April and May. Those 2 months were very dry. It was our last 2 months of below average rainfall, where we had only 16% of normal for April, which was the second driest April we've had on record at the Basin, and May, which even though we saw the start of the wet season happen in mid-May, it was still below average for us. Most of the rainfall didn't focus on our area. All of that said, now that we know what we know happened in June, that dry period wasn't a bad thing for the system. I'll forward now back to and spend some time talking mostly about the June rainfall event that was Invest 90L was the name that it was given. So it did occur over a few days in the middle of June from the 10th to the 14th. And it wasn't a tropical storm or anything like that. It was an area of investigation 90L. So it was a surge of tropical moisture that came up from the Gulf of Mexico. It was predicted in advance. Our meteorologists and meteorologists all over Florida were predicting heavy rainfall for our area. So the picture here on the top right definitely shows that we were going to anticipate receiving 10 to 15 inches of rainfall over a few days, over really what was focused on the southwest coast of Florida. And that order of magnitude of rainfall triggers some things for us to do. Andrew already mentioned how many gate changes we had to do to get ready for that type of rain event. So since we had some lead time going up to it and everything, we did make some gate changes, some operational changes going into it as the forecast didn't decrease as the time got closer. So let me talk a little bit about how we prepared for the rain event. Andrew already talked about all the gate operations that we did, but also what helped the system perform so admirably was the very dry conditions we had ahead of time. So this was our first big, rain event for the season. All of the area lakes and stormwater ponds were already low, so there was available storage. Wetlands were low, groundwater surface groundwater levels were all pretty low. as we were just exiting dry season. So that all helped give us room to store water and fill up those wetlands, those natural areas as we moved into it. So you can see here on the picture, we did do some pre-storm drawdown activities. This is GG2. And you can see the normal water line and some of the high water lines kind of on the structure. So we still did make operations ahead of the storm to get the water levels down as far as we could in advance of the rain event. So you can see they're down probably over a foot or more here from our normal water surface elevations. And like Andrew already mentioned, we had people out everywhere doing lots of things before the event. So how much rain did we actually get? I know the forecast is one thing. Well, we all know that we got a lot of rainfall from it. Our average was about 11.5 inches for our big Cypress Basin rain gauge network. It was interesting, and it was nice to see the actual forecast almost landed exactly on what we actually received. So those two meshed up very well, which allowed the system, all the preparations we made actually, they happened exactly how we wanted it to happen and we prepared for. So there were some differences. I wanted to note a couple highlights here on some minimums, some maximums. So the lowest area that got rainfall was over in the Immokalee kind of region, and it only got about 6 inches. But then if you want to compare and contrast that, only a few miles away, really, relatively speaking, got over 22 inches of rainfall. So that's a very big difference in the amount of rainfall that you received just over 3 days that we got. And I want to remind everyone, our average rainfall for June is typically only 10.5 inches. So we received 110% of our month's worth of rainfall in 3.5 days that we had to prepare for. So it was definitely a lot of rainfall that we had to contend with. And you may ask, well, what does that actually mean? How much rainfall does that equate to, as far as everyone's heard about a 100-year storm, a 25-year storm, et cetera. So I want to spend a little bit of time. We've done some analysis on the rainfall that occurred in our area. And what you'll see on the right is a picture of the southwest, our kind of area. And each color, each grid is the return interval. So if it's a 25-year or 100-year or whatever that design storm was, spread out over the basin. And so what you can see are the kind of the green and the yellow lines. Those are the 25-year storm events that occurred throughout our region. So really, we've had a good spread of different rainfall coverages. So the Golden Gate, Maine, Cocohatchee, a lot of the key areas of our watershed received that 25-year rain event, which is about a 4% chance occurring in any given year. And that definitely taxes our system, and it fills it up, and we go very much into flood control mode. But that is in stark contrast with areas in Big Cypress Preserve which received over a 500-year event. Those are the dark red areas on the right of the map there that received or more than a 0.2% chance of 500-year event. This really just helps to visualize how the rainfall changed. And it's not, when you say a 25-year event, it's not everywhere all at once. It's not a 100-year event everywhere all at once. It depends on where you are. So this just helps graphically, hopefully show that story a little bit. So I already kind of highlighted that the system performed very well during the rain event. And really, given that most of our canal system had a 25-year rainfall amount in it, it performed very well. All areas except one stayed in their normal operational mode. That doesn't mean it even got to its design level, what you would see and what we would expect during a 25-year event. And a lot of that has to do with the pre-storm operations that we did and the antecedent, the dry conditions leading up to the event. So the only one that really crested above the normal operational range was GG2, and here's a picture of it here at its crest. And it peaked still 2 feet lower than what happened during Hurricane Irma. And they were roughly equal in the amount of rainfall we got over the storm period. So it peaking 2 feet lower just shows how much the dry conditions that lead up to it really impact how the system performs. But we had no major operational issues. All the canals remained within operational range and did excellent throughout the entire event. So very glad to see, and it was a great test, and the system worked just as intended. So back to kind of our normal water conditions report. I'll stair step very quickly through the system here. This is the Golden Gate main canal. We've got GG4 and GG1, and the blue line is, you can see how the water levels ahead of the rain event here at the bottom of the blue range, and it jumped all the way up to the top just overnight almost from that one rainfall event. So that's how quickly the system responds. And then, but it never got outside of its normal operational ranges. You can even see if you look out in the future, like September, October, we have seen higher water levels throughout the system before. So Cocohatchee, a similar story here. You can see Coco 1 is the purple one. That's our coastal structure. And you can see that pre-storm drawdown as the purple line moved to the very bottom of range in anticipation for all of the rainfall that we actually did receive this time around. Fact Union as well. This is a very similar story. Again, the system performed admirably, and you can see the pre-storm drawdowns, but we've returned it right back to our normal levels. Henderson Creek, again, you can see how quickly these water levels go up. Those recessions, as we approach the June rainfall event, were well below our normal operational levels, well below the blue shaded areas. And we got 11 inches or 12 inches of rainfall on top of that. So you can imagine the result may be different if we get another storm event like that in the future when the water levels aren't that low. It will perform differently than it did this time around. So I want to spend a little time talking about picking and strand operations and some of the changes that have happened this year versus where we were last year. Last year, this time of year was very dry. We didn't have a whole lot of rain. We only pumped very little last year. This year is very different. There's been a lot of pumping, restoration pumping moving south through the area. And in addition to that, there's also more restored area on the available for the water to flow. So the entire green polygon on the left is now the restored area that as of June 2024, it's about 38,000 acres. And in the amount of time since May to a couple days ago, we pumped 30,000 acre feet, which if you think about it, that's a little less than a foot over that entire green polygon over that period, over that 2-month period. If you want to compare and contrast that with what we did last year, we pumped 40,000 acre feet in the entire year last year out of both pump stations. So we're getting close to how much we pumped last year, and that's how much more water is in that restoration area. In addition, you've also got 66,000 acre feet that have fallen from just rainfall. So add all that together and we can see, which I'll talk about in a minute, how much sheet flow is moving across that region now and how different it looks as now compared to what it looked like a few years ago. So earlier in the meeting, there was discussion or highlight about the newly restored area of Fact Union Canal. And what I want to spend just a second here talking about that green square. That's the newly restored area. You can kind of still see the Fact Union Canal in this picture. It bisected that. That canal is no longer there. That's the canal that's been plugged. So now that we've had so much pumping and a lot of rainfall, I wanted to see if we could see any noticeable differences in the water levels in that newly restored area this year compared to what we saw when the canal was still there. So we have a few wells in the region, a few monitoring wells, and I picked a couple. So the blue one here I have highlighted is number 4. They all have a different name, but this one, that's where it's located. And what's on the right, those are the same types of graphs you see when I talk about the canal levels. So that green shaded area, that's the normal water elevation at that point before the canal plugging. So that's when the canal was in place. The brown line, that's the ground surface elevation. So you can see how quickly it responded to the rainfall event. There's no canal there. And it's actually way above, it's above the historical maximum we've seen in the last 25 years. And it's hovering right around, the number doesn't matter, but the number is around 7, which is above ground surface elevation. And then that's important because if I move to the next slide, there's another well on the other side of the canal, and it has the same water surface elevation as the one on the left. So that kind of indicates there's no longer a canal in the middle that's pulling the water towards it. It's now moving as a sheet across the landscape rather than directly into the canal. So you can see already with just a month's worth of pumping and restoration, we're already seeing activity or restoration benefits even in that newly restored area already. So this was interesting to pull and put together, and I'm excited to see how this trend continues for the rest of the year. So I might keep these indicators up here for the rest of the year going forward, just to see how this tracks going forward. So So I'll spend a little time here. This is the hydrologic conditions at our basin, and really the state of how wet or dry, how far off from normal are we with the terms of our water level inside of our natural areas in our canal system. So as you would suspect, on the right, you're seeing that's basically that's Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem. All of those areas are above the 90th percentile for this time of year. That means the water levels were low. Now it is full and there's no real storage available at this point in time. And that area is pretty much saturated at this point, this early in the wet season. On the left, you'll see a plethora of different colors on the left, from oranges to blacks to everything. So I'll try to explain that a little bit. The blacks mean it's above where it's been historically. But if you look at the I-75 system, right, through here, the one I'm circling, and how that ties into the Golden Gate main system, it's unusual to see an above average area that's just next to a below average area. And that's not by accident. That's what we were doing operationally. Rainfall fell on this particular day that elevated the areas of the I-75 system that were held up by our I-75-2 structure and unable to pass it as well as we would have liked, which is one of the reasons we're replacing that structure. But also, in addition to that, we lowered these sections down here way below their to the bottom of their operational range to try and create as much path, create as the most efficient path for the water to get out as quickly as we can, because it rains every day. So the area that I-75 provides flood protection for didn't need any more water at that point in time. So this was the goal, to really evacuate the water out as quickly as possible, but still remain within our operational ranges. So this was after the storm event passed back at the very beginning of this month. So again, to show how quickly things can change, and I'll just spend a couple seconds here, but if you look at the comparison here, you've got the pre-storm and post-storm pictures, and a focus on the two pictures on the right of each of the big squares. So we've got the water depth map on June 7th and the water depth map on the 15th. The one on the 7th, everything was basically way below ground surface elevation. And just a few days later, you can see that the groundwater levels came up, and now you've got sheet flow and restoration in the Fakahatchee area, in Picayune Strand, and in the Crew areas. So it's really amazing to see how quickly it can go from very, very dry to very, very wet, basically overnight, just a few days apart. And it'll stay like that as long as the rains continue, as we've seen. So going forward, what can we expect the rest of this wet season? So the forecast, the long-term, climate, the NOAA's seasonal outlook, there's an above average chance that we'll continue to have an above average wet season, at least through October. It doesn't mean we necessarily will, but that's what they're seeing in the climatological models. As far as the hurricane forecast, that's been, everyone has probably seen and talked about on the news, the extremely active season is expected to continue, and it really hasn't changed since my presentation back in April. It still expects a very active year. Where those storms go, we don't know yet, but we're always ready to deal with them when they come through. And in the short term, we did see Hurricane Beryl come through already, not our area, but the southern part of the Caribbean is impacting Texas this morning. And in the short term, we've got daily rainfall will probably continue in our area here, but nothing exceptionally noteworthy like we've experienced in June. And I will close there. I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions for Mr. Jackson? Go ahead, Mr. Hill.
Brent, do you have any feel for the change in the flow of water going out the Faka-Union Canal today versus years ago? I know it's kind of a theoretical question.
So it's kind of in a hybrid state right now, as you've got a partial Picayune Strand completed.
Yeah.
You've got less flow than we probably had previously because you have sheet flow that's going through some of the culverts on the eastern part of it. But until the Miller Canal gets fully plugged, you probably still have more flow than is desirable going through the Faka-Union Canal at US 41. So once that Miller Canal is plugged, then I believe we'll see less flow going through that structure.
And as we learned earlier, too much fresh water is not good for oysters. Going out the canal in that area.
Right, and that is one of the places that the freshwater flow should be reduced from
Right.
Vicky and Strand and move it to the more saltier bays that exist that have been cut off.
Right, some more balance. Good, okay.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you for the great work, Brad, and your whole team. And I know Sean was doing those reports for us, and he did a great job. And it very much appreciate everything. Thank you. All right, next is our staff report and Candy Heater, our monthly financial report.
Thank you. The monthly financial report that I'm reporting on today is through May 31st, 2024. It is 66.7% of the completion of the fiscal year. So thus far, the Basin has collected $13.1 million in revenue, total recurring new revenue. So you've collected about $31,000 in excess above what we had estimated. And that is due to the investment earnings. Investment earnings, we've collected $217,000 more than what we had budgeted. We budgeted $60,000 and we've collected $277,000. And that is one of the reasons why in my previous discussion that we had increased your investment earnings for fiscal year 25 by $140,000. Your ad valorem tax revenue, you're at 98.7%. There's still $162,000 left to collect. We do not foresee an issue that you will not collect those revenues. On the expenditure side, we have expended $5.1 million thus far. There's about $4.8 million encumbered, mostly within the operations and maintenance state program. That program is where your capital program is, as well as your land management dollars and the field station funding. And there's still 11.2 million available. 2 million of that is your reserves. And hopefully we will not need to utilize that money. And then the remaining amount is where we are waiting on one of your major bids to come in that Lisa had mentioned earlier in today's meeting for one of your capital projects. As well as, remaining dollars to cover staff time, et cetera, for the remainder of the year for June through September. So everything looks very, very good for the moment.
Thank you, Candy. Are there any questions for Ms. Heater? I don't see any questions. Thank you very, very much, Candy, for being here today. I know how busy this time of year is for you and your whole team. So I look forward to seeing you when I'm over in West Palm Beach later on this week.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to general public comment. This is another chance for members of the public to speak on anything that was not covered in today's meeting. Mr. Miller?
We have no registered speakers in the room and no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, that moves us to our final opportunity for the board members to share anything they'd like with their fellow board members. We'll start with Ms. Smith.
No, I don't have anything except for I apologize for the cough attack. Sorry.
Oh, gosh, I hope you're okay.
Thank you to staff. Fantastic as always.
Okay, Mr. Hill?
I have no comment.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. McLeod.
Great meeting. Thank you so much.
Mr. Romano.
No comment at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our meeting, and I just want to thank everyone for their great work and working together and all of the interagency partnerships and cooperations. Y'all are just really doing a terrific job, and I really appreciate how you support this board. And I think that my colleagues would agree
that this is really an incredible team, and we certainly get a lot of great support up here to do our jobs. And I'd also like to thank Troy Miller, who makes this so easy and so seamless with the public comment and the board. And I really appreciate your support, Troy. And maybe some of you don't know, Troy was even on the road with us when we had our first public meeting with the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative Regional Project. And he was even there running the Zoom and running everything for us. So this is really great, Troy, and I couldn't do it without you, and I know we couldn't either.
You're very welcome, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to serve.
Thank you very much. And with that, our next Basin Board meeting is scheduled for Friday, August 23rd, right back in this room. And with that, we're adjourned.